is the new racism? Can you tell us what is that?
So I have argued in my work that after we fought in the 60s, the civil rights movement, we fought to end Jim Crow as we knew it. Mm-hmm. That did not mean the end of racism. We forced a change, an important change, and we're going to talk about the victories, the elements that we won in that historical moment. But systems of domination have ways of being reorganized or re-articulated. So what happened was in the late 60s and early 70s, a new system to reproduce race inequality emerged that, unlike the predecessor, unlike Jim Crow racism, depended on subtle, seemingly non-racial practices. Now you see it, now you don't practice it. Let me give you one example. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how we are excluded or treated in stores. Okay. In the Jim Crow era, you know that we people of color had either, okay, you can come to the store Saturday between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Or if you come to the store and there is a white person, that white, we will not deal with you until we deal with every single white person. And by the way, you are a different customer. So in your case, you cannot try out suits or hats because you get, if you touch them, they get polluted. Okay, all that sort of disappeared. Again, we fought to change that. But that doesn't mean that we don't experience this differential treatment in stores. Right. It means that the way in which we experience exclusion and differential treatment has changed. So now, let me give you the new things that exclusionary practices that we experience in stores. Mm-hmm. So one is, you and I are college professors, so now we can drop some coins and buy some nice things, yeah? Except that when we go to the fancy stores, we often are ignored. Happen to Oprah Winfrey too, happen to all kinds of rich black people that, oh, this black person don't have money, so I'm not going to waste my time. So we're systematically ignored. Mm-hmm. Or secondly, we are police, but police in a clever way. So here comes Mignon, and you are in aisle 1, and you move to aisle 2 and aisle 3, and you notice that there is a clerk that by chance happens to be in every aisle that you are checking. So you know that they're checking you in a clever way. Mm-hmm. And then the last strategy that I usually talk about is when they kill you with politeness and they go to you, may I help you? Just looking. Minute later, may I help you? Still looking. And then I now go by the rule of 3. So if they ask me a third time, I'm like, actually, you can help me. I'm trying to steal this fancy code. And I was wondering if you could provide me a few ideas. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean it like that, sir. I'm like, you did, sucker. We know. By the way, we have empirical data on this. And the way do you corroborate that these things have a racial angle is you do testing. You set testers. You match them by all credentials except race, yeah? So we have sent testers to restaurants to try to buy cars and stuff like that. And they have found systematically, you, for example, as a black woman, if you want to buy a car, you better send a white man on your behalf, because black women get then the double whammy, the gender race whammy. So you get the worst possible deal, independent of your credit worthiness, yeah? Mm-hmm. So you are taking notes. If you don't have a white friend, buy one. Every person of color needs a white. I'm just kidding, audience. I'm just saying that it is so important that we recognize that race matters, that now, because we have empirical evidence documenting the significance of race, we have to do it. Look at what happened. Where was it? A month ago, we learned about this woman in, I don't know if it was Indiana, but anyway, so she's trying to sell her house, mm-hmm. and she gets an assessment, and they tell her, okay, your house is worth $125,000, and something sort of wasn't right. She got a second assessment, and they told her 110. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to get anywhere between 110 and 125. And she talked to folks in the fair housing community who told them that seems like a low assessment. And she then basically remove all black identifiers from the house, no pictures of family, etc., no black power, no picture of Martin Luther King. And they had a white friend standing for her. And guess what happened? The assessment moved to $250,000 or $60,000. So race matters. And the funny thing is that often we don't even know we're experiencing discrimination, which, going back to the question, that is the way that the new racism regime tends to operate. Is that now you see it, now you don't fashion. White folks have plausible deniability, because if I go to a court of law and claim discrimination in a store because a person asked me 3 times, may I help you? They tell me, you're crazy, case dismissed.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned that, because the reason why I was writing notes is because you triggered a couple of things in my head and I wasn't even aware that they happened at the same time. And I think that it just goes to show that oftentimes people of color, we don't always even know what's going on, right? And only maybe sometimes after the fact, unless it's really egregious, right? I was in where is it? Wherever Thomas Jefferson's thing is here.
Monticello.
Monticello, there you go. I was gonna say Montpellier. Monticello. And I was in the gift shop and I was with a friend of mine who's white from Arizona visiting. We were in the gift shop and I was looking at all of lately I've been in this thing where I only want to buy things made in the US because I want to support the US, and preferably if it's black owned, then I'll support black owned, right? So I was looking at the bottom of all of their trinkets, trying to figure out where they were made. And so I kept picking them up, looking down and putting them down. And I was just sort of going around the store and I realized that there was a woman following me. And I'd never been aware that has happened to me before. So I'm watching her and I started getting really agitated and I thought, okay, what can I do here? So I started going from place to place and just picking them up and doing it faster and faster and faster.
Just to force her to do it again.
Just to make her like jump a little bit. I'm like, I'm going to make her work for this. And then finally I just stopped and I said, you know what, this isn't worth it. We went outside and I told my colleague, and I was telling my colleague, we have to go. I said, this woman was, she was following me around the store. And she said, oh, no, she wasn't. I'm sure she wasn't.
That is the worst element when you tell the racial stories and our white friends claim racial innocence, and they always come with it may have been this, it may have been that. It is anything but racism.
Yeah, and this was the woman my friend, she's like family. She's like family to me. And so I explained it to her and we let it go. And then at some point I couldn't let it go when she was visiting. And I had to have another colleague who's in African-American studies, who's a white man. I had to have him explain it to her, and only then could she understand it.
Isn't that something?
She couldn't accept it coming from me. She's known me for 20, 30 years, didn't believe me. And then a couple of years after that, she apologized to me, because when everything blew up, she really understood it. She said, I'm so sorry I denied your existence. I'm sorry that I didn't respect what you were telling me. And I mean, she apologized profusely.
I'm still waiting for my apologies. My list is growing, and so far no apologies forthcoming. So
no, you need better friends like mine. So I have anecdotal data to support what you said, but the new racism is alive and well in America, and it's very difficult it's not terribly perceptible all of the time, but it definitely has the same sort of effects on individuals. It puts us at disadvantages. It creates stress and health issues, of course.
And it works in all areas. So for example, you and I were excluded from colleges back in the day during the Jim Crow period. And now we are accepted through filters, and the filter is an exam that we know, those exams, admission tests that we take, SATs, etc., are not predictors of greatness in the academy, but they're still used. Think about in grad school, the GRE is used as if truly determines your capabilities and your likelihood of do well. And actually the empirical data shows that's not the case.
Right.
But it's still used because we in average score significantly less than whites. So it is a good test of the new racism, because if I go and I have done this fight again and again with my colleagues, telling them, why do we still use the GRE test when it's not predictive of anything? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they're like, who says that? I'm like, all the empirical work. Plus, how many times you admit those superstars, GRE superstars that drop out in the first semester? And how many times you reject that person that was slightly less in the GRE test, who then 20, 30 years later becomes a superstar? Exactly. So I tell them this, I know a very important case of a young Puerto Rican scholar who did not do too well in those exams, and thankfully was admitted to Wisconsin and Chicago, and some of the so-called top places in the US, ended up having his first job at Michigan. And they're like, who is this person? I'm like, me.
Yes.
So yes. By your standards, you would have thrown me out of the academy. And I'm telling you that these, the mechanics of the new regime are such that they always have plausible deniability. Because when I try to invoke that the use of these exams is a racialized strategy, they are like, no, this is an objective test. And like, my friend, it's not objective based on gender or class. It is a test designed along white middle class standards. So we know that white male, mostly middle class standards, but the effect is fundamental in terms of race and class. Yeah. So poor whites do worse than middle and upper middle class whites in the same test, net of so-called IQ. So what are you talking about? So I know the data, but ultimately, as you know well, on racial matters, it's not just about data. It's not about empirics. It's about perceptions, and perceptions become their reality. So they perceive the test. They perceive they are good people. They perceive that because they are good people, they will never discriminate, and therefore the test must be okay.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting, because what I'm hearing you say is it just keeps coming up in my head again, which is that the US is a functionalist system that is meant to perpetuate the status quo. And that's how sort of this racism works. You say that there's different, it sort of has, it has evolved or come up in different ways. It shows different faces over time, but it functions the same way again and again and again, producing the same outcomes. It's just wild.
The outcomes are the same, race inequality for some and race privilege for others. But the strategies of racial domination have changed dramatically. Yeah, in that sense, I always want to push back to some in the Afro-pessimist tradition, because although we're still at the bottom of the barrel between being enslaved or dealing with Jim Crow or dealing with the new racism, hands down, I prefer to deal with the new racism. And this, let's be also honest, the fact that we're dealing with the new racism is because we fought. We have been fighting against racial oppression from slavery onward. And I don't want to disempower folks by telling them that the more things change, the more they stay the same. No, there have been changes. Inequality remains. But think about this. You and I are now college professors having a discussion about the significance of race in America. That would not have been possible 50 years ago.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's what I keep trying to tell my students. Vote matters, fighting matters, your everything that you do, your motivation, and you can actually change the world, because it's been done, right? Yeah. And it's done by young people. It's not old people like us, right?
It's well, talk about yourself. I'm still like
all right. So you're kind of old. No, I'm kidding. So listen,
I'm 59, but looking 58.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm right behind you, kid. I'm right behind you. It's all right. So I want to talk to you a little bit about another kind of racism, which is the colorblind racism, because that's the one that was really prevalent through much of my life, I think, which was which kind of explains why I've had this sort of schism in my brain, or I've had this like existential crisis around race as an individual, not as an intellectual, not as a scholar, but as a person, I think. So what is colorblind racism? What is this all about?
Okay, so colorblind racism is the ideology. We talk about the new racism. So colorblind racism is the ideology that emerged to accompany and support and ultimately justify the new racism regime. And as an ideology, similar to all ideologies, it has to match the strategies of domination. So if the strategies of domination in the new regime period have become, now you see it, now you don't, and whites have plausible deniability, colorblind racism works by using the arguments of classical liberalism in an abstract and decontextualized way to explain race affairs. And let me give you an example, because examples are the test of civilization. So before, in the Jim Crow period, if a white person didn't want me in their neighborhood or in their school, they would tell me straight up, I don't want you in my neighborhood. I don't. You bring our neighborhood down. Yeah. So today we know that whites still harbor those ideas and beliefs, but the way of justifying exclusion has changed. So today they say things like this: I am all for choice. People should have the choice of living wherever they want, and I don't want the government to intervene on people's affairs. If Black people want to live with Black people, fine. If white people want to live with white people, fine. If they want to mix, great. But the government should do nothing about these matters, which sounds like a liberal, like classical liberalism. Choice. The problem is that the housing market, both in terms of realtors as well as individual property owners, is a highly racialized market. So your choices and mine are restricted because the realtors today, using new racism strategies, what they do is they steer people into neighborhoods. So you're Black, let me tell you to a Black neighborhood. Of course, if you tell them, I want to live, I did this in North Carolina when I moved here. I said, I want to live in a racially mixed neighborhood. And they told me, oh, stop right there. We cannot talk about race because that is racist. Besides, we don't have white neighborhoods. We don't have Black neighborhoods. We only have neighborhoods. I'm like, that is odd because I see that most of the people in this neighborhood are white and most of the people in that neighborhood are Black. So what are you talking about? I said, no, we don't have anything. Race doesn't matter. It's a colorblind world. So that is the strength of that ideology, that it addresses, helps justify the contemporary racial order of things without doing so in a vicious, overt way. It's subtle. It is like now you see it, now you don't. So you know that race is part of the transaction, but people say, what did I say? I said that I oppose affirmative action because I believe in equal opportunity, which is why I think that affirmative action is discrimination in reverse. And you are like, are you smoking the walkie-talkie again? That's some nonsense, because your statement only works if discrimination ended. So because discrimination has not ended, you cannot tell me that you believe in true equal opportunity, because we don't have equal opportunity.
Exactly. The very premise is wrong to begin with. But help me understand the relationship between the colorblind racism and the new racism a little bit more. Like, okay, how do they interact?
They are elements of a package. Yeah, the entire package is called new racism because I want to address practices at the political, economic, social level. Yeah. Things that happen to you in a store or when you try to vote and they try to deny the vote to you in a clever way. Again, the new racism has produced a new language here. It's like, I just need voter ID, or I don't think that you guys should be able to vote on Sunday, when they know that. So again, new strategies that are seemingly non-racial but have racial effects. So the colorblind racism is the racial ideology. This package of ideas, tropes, stories that accompany and ultimately support the entire new racism regime.
I see. I got you. Okay, so they are they're interconnected, and
they're part of the same.
I got it. Okay, cool. Wow. It's just going to be hard for us to get our hands around this thing when it just morphs. I wonder why it shapes. Is it because of like political forces or culture, or what is it about this whole phenomenon of racism that allows it to shape over time? Is it because it has to sustain and maintain, or what is it?
Well, first of all, both in terms, racism as a system of practices and racism as an ideology, both have to respond and be shaped by history. So for example, the Black Lives Matters movement forced a change in discourse. So now everybody has to contend with notions like systemic racism. Now they know what you and I knew forever, which is, wow, police brutality is real. Black and brown suspects, and even if they're not suspects, are more likely to be killed by police, whether they have a weapon or not.
Exactly.
So that's part that it has to accommodate to new situations. Let me give you one example. So the book that you read it's getting dated, but you know, old stuff is good. Those of us oldies are still good. Old music is good. So, but an ideology has to change. So, for example, some of the semantic moves, these are elements of the colorblind ideology that I discovered when I did the work in the late part of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st. Things like, I'm not a racist, but some of my best friends are Black. I don't know their names, but I know they are my best friends. What is the name of that Black woman? That Black woman that works in the house? You know, okay. So those moves are still out there, but are becoming a bit dated, and new similar moves have emerged. So for example, in the last 10 years, two that have caught my imagination are, I voted for Obama, so...
Right. So I can't be racist, right?
That's it. And the other one is, I'm a good person.
Right.
I'm a good person. So, and I'm like, if I had I now tell him in my talks, in my lectures, I mention, if I hear another white person telling me I'm a good person, so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to slap you right now, because that is nonsense. It's not about whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's about what are you doing or not doing to fight race inequality. And you sitting in the corner and say, I'm a good person, while you receive the unearned wages of whiteness, you are part of the problem. It's not enough for you to tell me I'm a good person. It's, if you're a good person and cognizant that racism is systemic, what are you doing to bring racial justice to America? What are you, or are you just free riding on white supremacy?
Right.
You're like, I'm a good person, but I'm not going to do jack about the system of inequality where I, my people, and my kids receive advantage. That is not evidence of you being a good person. That means that you're free riding.
Exactly. I love that. And you talked about the unearned wages of whiteness. What does that mean? What does that mean?
The term doesn't come from me. It comes from the work of David Rodiger, who wrote this book on the wages of whiteness. And in his version of the argument, following the work of Du Bois, he claims that white folks ultimately, and he was concerned particularly about poor whites, get the psychological wages of whiteness, meaning that at the bottom, they can always say, at least I'm not Black.
Exactly.
So I have the privilege of being a white person. In my version, I said that it is true that white folks do get the psychological wages, but they also get a heck of a lot in terms of material wages. So it doesn't matter where. So if you do the analysis of the white community by class, upper class, middle class, lower class, at every class position, advantage white. So you go and check poor whites and poor Blacks working in Burger King. So presumably you say they're in the same class location, except that class is also a racialized experience. So it is not the same to be flipping the burgers and dealing with the toilet in Burger King than being the manager. Although you can claim that those people are more or less in the same boat and that the white person make a little bit more money, so therefore they're in the same position, you are like, actually, no, they are not, because they're doing different things. And the little difference, so let's say you work in Taco Bell. Taco Bell likes to give their employees Employee of the Month, and they put the pictures of all the white good employees of the month. And they raise your salary like 15 cents, Well, guess what? If the minimum wage is $7.75, and I'm working at $7.75, and my white colleague is working and making $8.50, although substantively they're in the same location, because there's not enough difference to say, wow, you're making $8.50 an hour. But guess what? The 850 person compared to the person making 775, that 850 person thinks that I am making 850. I'm not like Mignon making 775. It means that I'm much better than her.
I see the differences between black and white, right? But then you also, I always think about the differences within group, right? Within whiteness. And I think to myself, all right, so these individuals, they earn this unearned wage or privilege or this benefit of thinking that they're better than me because they make 15 cents more than me. But I see them as being enslaved in some ways to that ideology themselves, right? And because they're not likely going to transcend, you know, the class structure to reach the upper SES within whiteness either, right? I mean, there's a pecking order within whiteness also, even though it's different than between black and white. But I think that white folks need to start understanding what the disadvantage of this system is for them. You know,
and you and I know the empirical material supporting this argument, but people don't live life based on so-called facts. They live life in a combination, and that combination involves fundamentally perceptions, subjectivity. So although theoretically I can demonstrate in a coherent way that white folks as a group, the white masses would benefit by joining the black and brown masses to move America to a more democratic, inclusive, and dare I say, socialistic society. That is theory, and people don't live off theory. People live off practice, and practice is that they believe they're losing out to us, that if they're in trouble, they're not challenging corporations. They're not challenging necessarily their bosses. They're challenging us. They're losing out because of Black people. They're losing out because of immigrants. They're losing out because of women. They're losing out because of gays and lesbians, because of trans people. It is anyone but rich white folks who are at the top of the pecking order.
Right, right. I mean, that's so difficult because in light of that, it makes me wonder. So I guess I'll ask you, so what do you think is the most effective way to advance policy change, to advance racial equity when we have a potential ally that is just completely blind to you know what they're losing in this game? You know what I mean?
Not completely, because thankfully, the creation of these groups that we call races, black, white, etc., they're not manufactured equally. So there is some elements of variance, which explains why we have had white folks who have fought for racial justice and have died for that. Too few for my taste, but it's important for us to recognize the fractures in the white team. And unfortunately, we also have fractures in the black and brown team. There are black and brown people that are like, hey man, I want to trade you for a progressive white. Because you are a disgrace to our community. But anyway, so you ask, the question is, what is the best way of fighting these systems? The best. So, okay, we in the academy preach for education. And we're producing this video to educate the students. And education is important, but education has not liberated many people in human history. Neither have facts. Yeah. So my colleagues are into fact production. I'm like, I have the data. I'm like, can you give me one example where data has liberated anyone in human history? So I'm not saying that we don't need data and that we don't need facts, but I'm saying that historically, the most precise and precious way that we have had to change the world is social movements, is protest. And we have been in the fight against racism, in the collective fight against racism from slavery onward. The color of suspicion in America is black and brown. So long as you are black and brown, no matter who you are, no matter what you drive, you are racially profiled, whether you walk, whether you jog, whether you go and sleep in Yale University, whether you're selling lemonade in a park, you are barbecuing, whatever you are watching, you are walking in a park in New York, no matter what you do, they are looking at you. And they're thinking,
Sleeping in your own apartment like Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor.
Like the young man who was eating ice cream or playing a video game in Texas that was shot by the police officer because she thought she was in the wrong apartment, right? That you can walk into somebody else's apartment and shoot them.
And be like, well, I admit it, so it definitely is not a racist incident. I got confused. Even the incident by the police, I was talking to a journalist yesterday, and we were talking about all these mistakes by the police, yeah? And I said, this is really racialized confusion, and we need to deconstruct the incidents. You can train police officers all you want on implicit bias, etc. It will not do a dent because the problem is larger. The police officers are not only a selected segment of the white community, the more authoritarian members of the community, but besides that, as regular white folks, they believe all kinds of stereotypes about us. So when, and let me tell you my own experiences, often I get little respect on the police when they stop me. I always get the, what's up, man? I'm like, what? What's up, man? Or, where are you going? I'm like, what do you mean? The question is, sir, license and registration. That's it. But I never get the sir. I get an encounter that begins not here, but here. They're already high. They're using a tone that is problematic. And if I respond as an equal member of the human club and reciprocate their animosity, I'm in trouble.
Yeah.
So what do we do? And what do we tell our children to do? Keep it cool. Keep your hands on the wheel. Do not react. Do not say anything. Be respectful. But guess what? Even when you do that, think about this brother who was in the military, who stopped, and he's totally like under control, nice. He's not even asking for anything. And the police keep insisting, get out of the car. And he's telling them, I'm afraid.
Yeah, he said it.
He said it, and they still punish him. So no matter what you do, you will experience a version of these strategies. Yeah, and the problem is that once you begin an encounter high, that may lead to what happened in Minneapolis, where a female police officer gets confused. Yeah. And rather than pulling her fake gun, went for the real gun. Yeah. And of course, it's a mistake, but it is a racialized mistake that happens because the encounter is already pregnant with all kinds of racial cognitions and racialized emotions. And I went online and checked, and guess what? This has happened before. It happened 2 years ago in Kansas, where a female police officer got confused and accidentally shot a black suspect. And the crime, his crime was nothing. So it was just a routine traffic stop, and so on him. In his case, he was not killed, he was just shot. Yeah. And I wish I had the data on these individual cases, because I think that both women, if you give them a test on bias, they will do fine. I think they were not so-called racist people. Right. So my big point, and I want the audience to really pay attention to this, my big point is that racial domination is not about bad apples. Right. It's about good apples following the dominant racial script of the period. And that period can be slavery, it can be Jim Crow, and it can be the new racism regime. So that in the new racism is mostly, why do we still have systemic racism? Because the bulk of the white masses, who are good people, some of them are my friends, some of my best friends are white. That's a joke, folks. But it's true, some of my best friends are white. That is also true. So my best friends are central in the reproduction and maintenance of whiteness and racialization. By just doing and I tell them, so where do you live? Oh, I live in this nice neighborhood. It's a white neighborhood. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, what proportion of your neighbors are Black, Latino? I'm like, I don't see many. It's mostly white. Okay. where do you send your kids to school? Oh, in the normal school. Is it the white school? I'm like, now that you say it, yes. And who are your friends? Well, it's Kevin, it's Crystal. And I'm like, so you don't have Tyrone or Sade or Eduardo or Jose? No. But my gardener is Puerto Rican. He's really good. I'm like, that's not a friend. That's your gardener. Come on. Right. You know better. So, what about your church or your synagogue or your temple? Is it integrated? I'm like, well, and then they get incoherent. Well, I'm a good person, and I don't mean, I teach my kids to be decent and nice to everybody because I want them to be colorblind. I'm like, wrong. What you need to tell your kids is that race matters and that you should begin doing things to change your whiteness, because so long as you are trapped in this whiteness, then your cognitive, emotional, ideational map will continue thinking and processing whiteness and then processing people like me as danger.
Exactly. I always say that the most liberal and kind-hearted white people are by far the most dangerous in my eyes, simply because they know better, and then they still and they can't see how they continue to contribute to these systems that are in place. You know?
And that's why those people then are also in the academy, at least, are invested in reproducing the mythology that racism is about poor white folks in the South.
Right. Exactly.
And basically, if we educate everybody and tell them, hey, you need to move from the South because there is something in the South that makes you racist, yeah? And you can no longer be working class because working class people are racist, yeah? So they're invested in that narrative, which is convenient for them because they are not Southern, or some of them are, but they claim, but I'm educated, I'm a good person, I'm a college professor, therefore I cannot be and I'm like, that's what in my work, I have been fighting the notion that the problem of racism is just about races. I said, no, the problem of racism is about collective practices in which most whites and unfortunately non-whites participate. Like you and I tell them, I participate. I'm like, oh, so you are a racist? I'm like, no, I'm a victim of racial oppression. And I wish I was not. I wish I could just be like, hey, today I decided, imagine that you and I say from tomorrow onward, we're no longer to be black people. We're going to be just regular Mignon and Eduardo without any race